as we just discussed a little bit ago, we have been talking about worship. These last 4 weeks have been an entryway into understanding who God says we are. Beginning with an empty cup, we come to have our vessel filled by Him. And very often we kind of take that for granted. We come and understand that worship is about being here and being filled up, about God giving us His presence again and again, about God reminding us of the good news that we are sinners saved by grace. Recognize that we cannot be our own Savior. Recognize that sin draws us away from Him, and yet, in His amazing grace, He comes towards us through the power of His Son dying on the cross, and He makes us new. That is Him filling us up. That is Him giving us a new identity in Christ. As He does that, there is no other natural response but to be giving of that identity, to have Him fill us up so incredibly much that our cup is overflowing. And as we overflow, we respond first to Him. We respond first by saying, yes, God, you are God and I am not. We respond by saying, I love you, God. I love you, Jesus. I love you, Holy Spirit. And only you are my Lord and only you are my Savior. And that's our response to Him. And we are not held back by the things of this culture. We are not held back by our human nature. We let that response fly towards Him. And then finally in this week, what we're going to focus on is the fact that we have such incredibly good news. We have been filled up so incredibly much that we do a disservice to the kingdom. That we do a disservice to the name Christian. That we do a disservice to the name disciple if we simply sit on it. If we only hold this good news and believe that it is only for us, if we hold on to this good news and we do not spread it out to the nations, then we are not fulfilling the idea of worship. We are not fulfilling the incredible process of worship. And so as we spend time on this last section, we look to Matthew chapter 28. And if you remember Matthew 28, you remember this is a well-known verse for many churches. This is a well-known church for our evangelical Christianity because this is where we get our marching orders. This is where we are told by Jesus what it is that He desires us to do. This is right before He heads back up to heaven, before He ascends into heaven, and He gives us some great words about what we are to do now. But I want you to have in the back of your head, I want you to have in the back of your mind a little bit of where we have been going in terms of that tabernacle, in terms of entering into the Holy of Holies. Remember what I said, that we were at one time in the Old Testament, we were told that the common people, that us not being priests could only go into a certain part. Could only go into that common area. But I want you to also know that as Jesus Christ gives us these words, He begins to remind us that we have this thing called priesthood of the saints. That we are all priests according to what He has told us. Remember in week 1, I said that part of what that How to Worship a King book does is give us a new identity, remind us of this identity that each and every one of us are a priest of Jesus Christ. And what that means is that we also have the ability to be in that Holy of Holies. And as we have entered into this tabernacle, as we have entered into the Holy of Holies, I want you to multiply that and see where Matthew 28 goes with it. And so from Matthew chapter 28, verse 16, we begin with these words. We begin by hearing about a mountain. In verse 16, you actually read under the heading, the Great Commission. It says this, then the 11 disciples went to Galilee to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. Just a couple of verses before that, remember that Jesus had been appearing to his disciples. He had been, after his death, after his resurrection, he had been going from place to place and showing that he was risen and showing that he was no longer in the grave. And so we actually hear in one of those verses that he is telling all of the disciples to meet him somewhere. He is telling all of the disciples, go to the place where I have told you to go. Go to the place that we have talked about in the previous times. And this is the mountain in verse 28 that we actually hear is the fulfillment of where he's telling them to go, where he's telling them to meet. The 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. Now, commentators and historians believe that this is Mount Horeb. The one that he's talking about, the place that he's talking about is Mount Horeb. And there you see a picture of it. This is a beautiful picture of that mountain, and you can actually see how developed it has now become. But remember, this was a central place for Jesus Christ. This was a central place for the Israelites because of the fact that he tells them to meet on this mountain. I don't want you to miss just a little bit of an Easter egg here. I don't want you to miss something that has been dropped before, because most commentators believe that this is the same mountain that Matthew talks about when he says Jesus went up on the mountain and started giving and teaching the disciples and all those who gathered. And that big teaching, that understanding that Matthew gives in chapter 5 is a little thing called the Beatitudes. And maybe you've heard of those. That goes through a whole lesson of where Jesus says, blessed are those who are meek. Blessed are those who are persecuted. Blessed are those who do what I say to do. And understand that Sermon on the Mount, as it's called, understand that Beatitude lesson is really sort of a standard for what it means to be a Christian. I've actually been told this: if you want to go through a bunch of series, if you want to find out where to preach and how to preach, do your best to stay away from the Beatitudes, they say. Because what else are you going to say? You could stand there for the rest of the day and you could go home and you can have dissecting all of my sermon, and Gary said this, but he didn't say this, and all that kind of stuff. But this is the ultimate sermon, right? Matthew chapter 5, read through it from Matthew 5 to Matthew 7. This is Jesus giving the sermon. And how on earth could we actually give any more than what his sermon says? How could we dissect these words any more? And yet we have to look at them and we have to understand that this is the standard for what he is calling us to. As we read through the Beatitudes, as we read through this understanding of being a Christian, I want you to get that he's laying a foundation in Matthew chapter 5. In Matthew chapter 5, we actually read this: when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside. And commentators and historians are thinking this is that same mountainside. Don't forget that. He went up on a mountainside and he sat down, and his disciples came to him and he began to teach them. And he said these words: blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Go home and read the rest of Matthew chapter 5 and Matthew chapter 6 and Matthew chapter 7, because it's a beautiful teaching from Jesus. And it's the standard for what it means to believe in him. It's the standard for what it means to be a Christian. And as he gives this standard, as he gives these basic foundations of being a disciple, he is on this mount. And as he goes through Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, and then the rest of it, as he goes through walking in different places, as he goes through doing different miracles, it all circles around and it comes back to this mountain in Matthew chapter 28. And so where I'm trying to go with this, what I'm trying to help you understand, what I'm trying to understand is that just as Matthew 5, 6, and 7 are standards for Christianity, just as it's a standard to be blessed if you're meek, it's to be blessed if you're persecuted, to be blessed if you thirst for righteousness, then all of those things are multiplied by what he's about to say in Matthew 28. All of those things are simply the foundation that he builds upon to get to this great commission. And so we get to Matthew chapter 28, building upon that same mountain, building upon that same teaching, building upon what he has already said. Matthew chapter 28, again, the 11 disciples went to Galilee to the mountain where Jesus told them to go. And when they saw him, this is verse 17, when they saw him, they worshiped him. Maybe, just maybe, you've heard that word before, worship. We've talked about it for 4 weeks now, right? So you kind of know what this is. Worship is a response. Worship is an umbrella that takes in what Jesus has done for us and gives out our glory and our honor to him. And so I don't want you to miss this recap that he gives us in verse 17 of our entire series. When they saw him, they worshiped him. It's a natural response to see Jesus Christ and to simply fall down, to simply give him everything you are. Remember, 2 weeks ago, we talked about some of the Revelation passages. We talked about how incredible it was to see the Lamb on the throne, how incredible it was to be in the presence of God. And the only thing that the servants could do that were surrounding that throne was fall down and worship. And this is the same idea. This is the same idea that Jesus is presenting himself to these disciples. The resurrected King is standing in front of them, and the only thing they can do is simply worship. We have to worship. Not because we have to, because we're going to get in trouble if we don't, but simply because there is no other response. When you meet Jesus Christ, when you see the forgiveness of your sins, when it truly sinks in that he is still in love with you after all of the junk and after all of the disappointment and after all of the things that you have chased instead of him, when you find out that he is still in love with you and that he still wants you as his own, then there's no other way to respond but to worship, to give him everything we are. And then in verse 17, the second half of it is one that continues to mess with me. And so help me mess with it a little bit. And maybe it can make your mind go a little bit too. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Some doubted. Now, here's the really cool thing that I found as I look through different commentators and different people that talk about this passage. Some will say that there was a bigger group there, that we're talking about all of the people that had somehow had some kind of involvement with Jesus. They were anybody who has just barely heard his name, anybody who was excited about him. These are all the people that were gathering around Jesus as he was on the mountain. Other commentators will say, no, go back to verse 16 and understand that it's only the 11 disciples. That it's only those chosen ones who were actually right with him through those 3 years. Those are the ones that are gathering. And what I want to be interested, what I want you to get curious about, what I want to ask about with just exploring it and wrestling with it is, what if? What if it was the whole group? What if it was a random group of 500, 5,000 people that had had some kind of interaction with Jesus, that were maybe seeing a crowd and just wanted to go along for it, and they were the ones that were doubting? What if it wasn't the 11 disciples, but if it was just these people that hadn't experienced all of Jesus that were doubting? Then we can go down the road of theology. We can go down the road of Reformed theology, because in the Reformed belief, of course, we have this idea of TULIP. And if you remember TULIP, it goes through these whole tenets of our faith, and it goes through this idea that we only respond when the Holy Spirit enables us to respond. He moves first. We hold on to that. He allows us to move out of our deadness and to respond to him. We can only say thank you when he enables us to say thank you. Without him, we have nothing. Without him, we are dead. And so could it be that he's actually giving us a little glimpse of theology, and he's saying that these are the ones who had not been enabled to worship. These are the ones who had not been enabled to say yes, to respond to him well. Could it be that we're actually seeing a little bit of the understanding of our Reformed theology in this one little verse? And then there's the other side of it, the other option that I saw, that I read through when it comes to these commentators on this verse. What if some of the disciples were the ones who were doubting? What if some of the disciples were the ones who really saw what Jesus was doing, had seen him in the flesh, and yet somehow still held on to just a little bit of doubt? And I wanted to chase that rabbit trail for just a second because I believe it has something to say to us today. In fact, it had something to do with that messy series that we came out of several weeks ago. If you remember the point of that series, if you remember the idea of that series, it's that when Jesus Christ takes us over and we say, yes, Lord, I give you everything, there's still going to be messiness. There's still going to be struggle. There's still going to be this real world. Not everything is going to be perfect. Not everything is going to be roses. Not everything is going to be hunky-dory. And so what if this is part of that message? What if there's a little bit of theology in terms of God taking whatever we offer and multiplying it in this little verse? When they saw him, they worshiped him, but they still doubted. What if that gives us an authority to say, yeah, in those times when I'm struggling, in those times when I don't really grab onto it completely, in those times when I don't even know how to pray, that's still worship. What if the people that were worshiping him were the same ones that were doubting? I just want to get curious about that. What if I can worship and doubt at the same time? What if I can say with everything I am, with everything that I can muster up, God, I believe in you and I worship you and I respond to you, but man, this is hard. What if we have the ability here to simply give what we can give and the Holy Spirit fills in the rest? One of my favorite pastors, Stephen Furtick, actually spoke at the Global Leadership Summit a few years ago, and he talked about this when it comes to leadership. He said the leader is the one who will stand in front of the people and will say, I know where we're going. I'm 100% sure. Here we go. We got this. Let's go. And then he'll get in the car and he'll say, where are we going again? Understand that there's this human nature that says, God, I give you everything I am. Do I really give you everything? I'm trying, God. I'm really trying to give you everything, but I still doubt. But I still struggle. There's one centurion that we have as Jesus comes across him. He says something like this, Jesus, I believe in you. Now help me in my unbelief. And that's been a tagline for me for the last several years because I want to believe with everything I am, and I still have doubts, and I still have fears, and I still have struggles. And so maybe, just maybe, this is him reminding us, I got you. I got you. I know. It's really hard for you to die to yourself. It's really hard for you to believe in someone who was ascended 2,000 some years ago and you haven't seen face to face. But just hold on to whatever tiny bit of faith it is. You want to go down the road of faith as small as a mustard seed. Remember that passage. Remember, we preached on that not too long ago. If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, then you can move mountains. And so maybe, just maybe, this is him giving us the okay to have faith the size of a mustard seed. Maybe, just maybe, this is him saying, I got you even with your tiny little faith. I got you even with your doubts. I got you. I'm still working. And then we get to verse 18. Some doubted. And then in verse 18, Jesus came to them and said this, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Last night we sat around the bonfire and I asked Sandra and Elijah, the other ones had to go to bed, Elijah gets to stay up a little bit later, but I said to them, what does this verse mean? What is this doing? Because I can't quite understand how it goes from doubting all the way to this assignment that we're going to have in a little bit here. Is this the tie? Is this the bridge? Is this some kind of just statement that Jesus has to give in order to be able to give us an assignment? And what we came up with as we wrestled with it, as we talked about it, was maybe, just maybe, this is an answer to the doubt. Maybe this is part of giving us his assurance. When I say, God, I give you everything I have, but I know I still have doubts, this is him jumping in and saying, okay, I get it that you still have doubts, but recognize that all authority on heaven and on earth has been given to me. Maybe this is him saying, I got this. As he says, I got this, as he helps us with our doubt, as he helps us know that he has the authority, he gives us an assignment. He gives us the next statement. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. This is the tagline. This is what Living Water started with. This is what so many churches have started with. This is what so many churches will put on their banner. Go and make disciples of all nations. Sort of like Matthew chapter 5. What can I say about that? You can listen to me rant on about it for 20 minutes and you're not going to understand it any more than we've already talked about it for 2,000 years. This is your assignment. This is it. This is the next step of our worship. This is the next step of us responding to him. As he has told us that he has all the authority, he has now told us, go and make disciples. And just for a second then, I want to look at what I seem to understand as part 1 and part 2 of making disciples. As we talk about making disciples, we also read that we are to baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And then we are to teach them to obey everything that Jesus has already commanded. We are to baptize and we are to teach. And what I want you to understand that as is simply part 1 and part 2. We really talk about this every time we do a baptism. Every time I stand up here, and whether it's a young child or whether it's an adult, I say something along the lines of, this is your new identity in Jesus Christ. This is marking your identity in Jesus Christ. How about this? If you remember, I try to remember to do this almost every time. Now I'm giving too much away, but if I forget your kids' middle name, I really apologize. But I try to ask for the middle name because really what our structure and what the Reformed theology and all that kind of stuff says is we should address them with the first name and the middle name, but we should leave out the last name. When we baptize, we shouldn't say their last name. And the reason that we do that, the reason that that's so significant is because technically we all have the same last name. What we are doing is being baptized into the family of Jesus the Christ. What we are doing is we are baptized into the family of Jesus alone. And so we give of our old identity, we give of our old name, and we all take on the same last name. When we do this baptism thing, we recognize that we have an identity in Jesus Christ. And if you remember, that's where we started this series. Being thankful of the fact that he gives us our identity. Being thankful of the fact that we are not identified by our last name. We are not identified by our job. We are not identified what people say around us. We are identified only by Jesus Christ. And that's signified in baptism. And so think of the process here. Think of how we have been baptized. And if you haven't been baptized, then talk to me afterwards because it's such a significant event and it signifies something so incredible. It signifies that being welcomed into this family of God, welcomed into this family of Christ. And as we do that to the people that come into this family, as we have had this done to us, the process begins again. It's a circular thing. It's an understanding that as you are being baptized, then you go and baptize. That's part of the going and making disciples. That's part of the assignment that he has given us, to go out and to give people that identity, to remind them of the identity that they have in Jesus Christ. And how about this? You can do this in everyday life. You can do this when you stand across from the cash register person and you can give them a new identity. You can smile at them and you can remind them that they are worthy. You can do this when you talk to your children. You can remind them that they are beloved in Jesus Christ. You can do this when you talk to your boss, when you talk to your coworker. You can remind of this incredible identity. Because what culture is going to say is, no. If that cash register person is mean to you, you be mean to them. If that child is not listening to you, then you belittle them. If that coworker is being mean to you, then you go and talk behind their back. And what this is telling us to do is, no. We got to give a new identity to people. That's part of the baptism. That's part of what Jesus is asking us to do when we go and make disciples, is to take that identity that he has given us and to give it to someone else, to remind them that they are worthy, to remind them that they have something special because they are a creation in the image of God. But it doesn't end there. We got part 2 of making disciples. You see, so often I think we have this understanding that, okay, maybe, just maybe, it's only about telling the identity. Maybe, just maybe, it's only about reminding people that they are new in Jesus Christ. But what we find out in part 2 of making disciples is that we are responsible to help people grow in Jesus Christ. We are responsible to teach, to obey everything that Jesus has commanded. And as I've read several commentators, as the historians will look at this passage, they'll say this is the process part of it. This is where the journey doesn't end with knowing your identity. This is where we are no longer able to just sit here and say, yeah, I'm going to soak it all in and I'm going to take everything that Jesus gives me. This is where we actually go and we give it back to others. We grow in Jesus Christ by teaching people to obey everything that he has commanded. Sandra was a high school teacher several years ago, and she actually graduated with sciences, especially with certain degrees and with certain classes. But somewhere along the lines when she was at Harrisburg, and I was in Sioux Falls, and we were living there, and she was actually asked to teach a class that she had never taught before. And so she struggled with the decision, even struggled with the idea of how am I going to give these students information that I don't even know. And so she calls up a friend that had that degree, and she's starting to learn some of the basics. She buys every book that she can on it, and she's trying to learn how to teach these students. And what she finds out is that as she's reading the book, she's overwhelmed by the information. As she's reading the book and listening to these people that know so much about it, she's overwhelmed. And so she enters in to day 1 to try to teach these students. And she's just barely a step ahead of them. And she's challenged. And they start asking questions that she doesn't know. And so the answer that she gives is quite often, let's go look it up together. And I've always held on to that as part of this teaching that we're asked to do. I guarantee that oh so often as you teach others about Jesus Christ, as you teach others everything that he has taught you, that he has commanded you, then you're going to be challenged and you're going to be asked to do something that you don't know how to do. And they're going to push back on your theology, and they're going to push back on what it is that you really believe. And the greatest way that you can learn more is to teach. And that's the circular device that he creates as he tells us to go and make disciples. We don't wait until we all have it figured out and then go and bring the good news. No, we go and bring whatever it is that we have, and he multiplies it, and he teaches us as we are teaching others. Teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And then how about this? This is the cherry on the top. This is the icing on the cake. This is the greatest news that I can give you. At the very end of this great commission, at the very end of this passage, at the very end of this assignment, he says, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Now, there's something about having someone beside you, isn't there? There's something about having a workout partner. There's something about having someone to push you on. There's something about not being alone that we take comfort in, that we take surety in, that we take some kind of security in. And as he tells us these assignments, as he tells us how hard this is going to be to go and baptize, to go and teach, to go and do all of these things, he gives us the ultimate. He gives us the greatest security that we could ever ask for. And he says, surely I am with you always. And don't forget what he just said a verse ago. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And the one who has all of that authority is the one who is now with us. And so as Paul would say, what else could I fear? If God is for me, then who can be against me? If I have him with me at all times, if I have him with me always, then what in the world could I possibly fear? I had a professor who, in the pastoral care world, said that you can do all of the words that you want, you can do all of the assignments that you want, but I can summarize pastoral care in one simple phrase: show up and shut up. Some of you are like, wow, you should really take that message when it comes to giving your sermon. What he was trying to convince us of, what he was trying to communicate to us was that presence is everything. Presence means so very much. And if you've been through a difficult time, you know this. If you've been through struggles, you know this. Someone can show up and try to give you the greatest words. We read about it in Job, right? We read about these friends who come to Job in his difficult time, in his struggles, and they try to explain it. They try to tell him why all these bad things are happening. They try to give him some kind of theology, and it's just blank words. And what he really needs, what we really need so many times, is simply presence. We simply need someone. And the greatest thing is that he fulfills that need. He fills that void by saying, I am the one who will be with you. And the cool thing is that that's an analogy. That's an exact way for us to fulfill our assignment. That's an exact thing for us to copy. If we copy his presence, if we copy the ability for him to go and just be with people, then we fulfill our assignment. We go and we take the gospel to all nations. We go and we make disciples of all nations. My hope and my prayer is that you have seen and you have felt this movement throughout these last 4 weeks. You saw the tabernacle, and Damon and I were very intentional about guiding you into that tabernacle, recognizing that it's not just the priest who gets to go into the Holy of Holies. It's not just certain people that get to be inside that presence of God. Now, knowing that we are priests of saints, knowing that we are all priests according to the identity that God has given us, we all enter into that Holy of Holies together. And we recognize that it doesn't stop there. In Matthew chapter 27, just a verse, chapter before this, Jesus Christ was persecuted and he was hung on the cross. And one of the things that happened as he died, as he breathed his last, was that the veil was torn. We sang it in one of our songs this morning, the veil has been torn. And Rachel, if you could put that tabernacle up for me just a second, I want you to remember the fact that that veil was the thing that separated the holy place from the most holy place. And the significance of that veil being torn is such as this, not just that we can enter into the most holy of holies, but understand that it's now burst wide open. There's something significant about the doors being open, about the windows being open, about the outside being a part of this building. And if I could actually do it, I would get in a lot of trouble with Mike and the facilities people. I would knock that stinking wall out, because right now in this very moment, there is no wall. There is nothing that holds this good news back anymore. The veil has been torn, and part of our assignment is to see that veil continue to break down, to see those walls continue to fall, to see and know that we have the holy God in all of this world. We've talked about it before at Living Water, that we want to be a church outside the walls, and I can't help but say, don't let that be a tagline. Don't let that just be words. Be different, church. In